Welcome to Story Planet, where every story is a gentle journey, a place where time slows down and every word feels like a soft breeze across your heart. Tonight, we have a story about two souls, two quiet windows, and a lamp that glowed brighter than either of them realized. It's called The Lamp. So go ahead, pour yourself a cup of something warm, or wrap yourself in a cozy blanket, whether you're pausing in the middle of your day or getting ready to drift into dreams. This story is waiting for you, ready to glow softly, just for you. The village hadn't changed much. Not really. The post office still had that uneven wooden step, the one Margot remembered tripping over as a child. The bakery still smelled like cinnamon, the kind that drifted into the street and lingered on your coat. The trees were tall, older than most memories, and they leaned in gently as if they remembered her too. Margot had come home, not to noise, not to company, but to quiet, and to a house that had been waiting. The cottage sat at the end of a winding path, a little bend in the road, where mailboxes tilted and morning fog kissed the hedges. It was white, chipped in places but lovely, and lined with ivy that curled up the sides like green ribbons. The fence was low and creaky and perfect. The windows were round at the top, with little brass latches that clicked when you turned them open. A tree leaned over the roof, old, gentle, and full of birds that sang just after dawn. The garden was wild, full of herbs and soft grass and flowers that came and went without asking. Inside, the air smelled like lavender and old pages. There was a kettle on the stove, a small blue radio on the shelf, and a stack of unread books on the table. This was her grandmother's home once. Now it was hers. She was 52, recently retired, from restoring paintings in grand museums, rooms with high ceilings and no windows. City life had grown too loud, too fast, too far from the person she used to be. But this had been her plan all along, the dream she tucked into her calendar, the quiet future she worked toward. Every late night, every skipped weekend. She wasn't escaping, she was arriving, exactly where she always hoped to be. Now she unpacked slowly, box by box, and breath by breath. She thought often about the life she once imagined, a slower life, with tea in the garden and curtains that moved with the breeze. A life filled with books, soft mornings, and nothing urgent. She had once dreamed of waking up to birdsong, of baking bread just for herself, of living without noise, without rushing. She didn't want a grand story, just a quiet one she could finally write with her own hands. She lit candles in the kitchen, just because. She watched shadows dance on the walls, and played music low and slow, and each night, at exactly 9 p.m., she placed a small amber lamp on the windowsill and turned it on. Just because she liked the way it glowed. Not bright, not sharp, just warm, like a soft hand holding yours. Across the lane, beyond a row of sleepy rose bushes, and a rusted gate that barely closed, was another house. Also old, also quiet. She noticed someone move in. 2 weeks after she did, a tall man with silver at his temples and a calm way of carrying things. Box by box, mostly books. He didn't seem rushed, didn't seem lost, just peaceful, like someone returning, not starting over. His name, she would later learn, was Daniel. He was 54. A retired schoolteacher, the kind who mended broken desks and remembered everyone's name. He had come back to his childhood home, the one he left long ago. He was quiet, but his eyes held pages of stories. He used to imagine it as a place he'd return to someday, when his shoulders were no longer heavy with schedules, when the mornings could stretch as long as they liked. Daniel had always believed life could be quieter than the one he lived. He had once pictured evenings with soft jazz on the radio, tomatoes growing outside his kitchen door, and someone, not a lover perhaps, but a companion, someone who didn't fill the silence but shared it. They didn't speak. Not yet. But each night, when Margot's lamp came on, so did his. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then she began to notice how it flickered on. Just a few moments after hers, like a quiet answer, or a good-night nod. They were both in their 50s, both newly retired, both coming home to the place where they first belonged. Neither had married, not because they hadn't known love, but because life, in its quiet way, had never asked them to stay, until now, and quietly without knowing. Both of them were thinking. They both thought they had never truly lived, and now, here, in this still, quiet place, they were just about to begin, a life meant to be in their own gentle grown-up way. They had the same thoughts, but not known to each other. She began to wait for that glow. Dinner felt warmer, books more comforting, sleep came easier. Some nights, she sat with tea in hand and saw him through his window. Book open, lamp glowing. A chair turned slightly toward hers, their houses, like two lighthouses, calling without sound. One windy evening, she returned from the grocer, soaked to the bone, and there, on her step, was a small brown parcel, tied with string. Inside, chamomile tea, no note, just a simple gift, and a feeling that rose faster than the kettle. She smiled and turned her lamp on early that night. Was it a thank you? A reply. A beginning. The days moved gently. Then, like leaves across water, she planted rosemary in the kitchen window, painted the hallway in a soft shade of sage, and for the first time in years, she opened her sketchbook again. And each night, without fail, her lamp met his. Two lights, side by side in the quiet, never touching, but always near. Sometimes that's how love begins. Not in a flash, but in a flicker. Not with words, but with light. The days were slow and lovely, just the way they had both imagined. It was early spring, the kind where the air still held a chill, but the earth had begun to smell green again. Margot had planted lavender and lemon thyme. She spoke to the soil when no one was listening. Daniel had polished his garden bench, moved his bird feeder near the window, started reading outside, wrapped in his old fisherman's sweater. They still hadn't spoken, not properly. But something had shifted. On a morning brushed with soft sun, Margot found a book on her front porch, wrapped in brown paper, the same string as the chamomile tea. Inside, a note, written in tidy cursive. Page 47 is my favorite. She opened the book, a collection of poems, the kind with just a few lines, but miles of feeling. She read page 47 twice and smiled. That evening, she left a jar of orange marmalade on his step with a note, in return for the verse, a little sweetness. The next day, a single daffodil appeared in her mailbox, tied with twine. No note this time, but the message was clear. A friendship, a closeness, something real. It didn't need words, not yet. Each day brought something new. A bag of lemon shortbread cookies, a sprig of rosemary tied to a paper bookmark, an old photograph of the village from decades ago. And sometimes, just silence. But even that felt full. In their windows, the lamps still glowed, always at 9. One night, the rain came, soft and long. Margot stood at her window, watching the droplets trail down the glass. She held her cup, her fingers warm around it. Across the lane, Daniel lit his lamp, then held up a book. She laughed softly and raised hers too. It felt like a conversation, one only the quiet could understand. They both had stories, not dramatic ones, just tender ones, lived and tucked away. Margot had once loved a man who wanted noise, parties, cities, travel. She had wanted stillness and bread dough beneath her hands. Daniel had once been in love with a colleague, a brief warmth that drifted like chalk dust in a classroom. Neither of them had settled. They had waited, even when they didn't know they were waiting. Now they were slowly writing something new, not with pens but with gestures. Little glances, moments placed gently in each other's path. The village watched, quietly, and smiled. Children began to wave at both windows each night, calling them the lamplight pair. The grocer began saving 2 of the freshest loaves, one for each of them, as if their mornings were part of the town's rhythm now. In the local library, 2 new bookmarks began appearing in the poetry section, one embroidered with a lavender sprig, one cut from sheet music. No one claimed them, but everyone understood. The butcher once left 2 wrapped cuts on Margot's porch, with a note that simply read, "Dinner for 2, just in case." The quiet between them had become sacred, like the hush between the lines of a favorite song. Then came the day they finally spoke. Not through notes, not through gifts, but with voices and smiles. It was a Sunday. Birdsong spilled through the hedges. Margot was outside, kneeling in the soil, trying to untangle a root ball of mint. Daniel was walking past, basket of lemons and books in his arms. He paused. She looked up, and he said, "That smells lovely. Mint?" She laughed, nodded, trying to keep it from taking over the world. He knelt down beside her, placed the basket between them. Let it take over. Maybe the world needs more of it. That was it. Their first real exchange, and it felt effortless, as if the silence had simply stepped aside to let something warmer through. They stayed there for a long while, talking, laughing softly, and when the light began to dim, they both stood and turned toward their windows. At 9, 2 lamps glowed again. But that night, there was something more in the air. A conversation begun, a story finally finding its voice. The days were longer now. Spring had stretched itself fully awake. Birdsong came earlier, and the shadows shifted later into the evening. Margot began waking without her alarm. Just the hush of wind through the trees and the scent of something in bloom. She took her tea to the front steps, wrapped in a shawl she had crocheted years ago, the one with one loop always slightly off. Daniel did the same, except his tea was strong, and his chair creaked when he settled in. They waved now, each morning, a small lift of the hand, just enough. The space between them had become something gentle, not rushed, not loud, but full of small things, little comforts, moments that mattered. One morning, Daniel left a folded paper crane on her gate. It was blue, sharp-edged, deliberate. Margot placed it on her windowsill, beside the amber lamp. 2 days later, she replied with a feather. White, soft, tied with a ribbon. He didn't say anything, but he smiled longer that evening, and when they met at the grocer, both reaching for the same jar of apricot jam, they laughed in a way that told 1,000 quiet stories. "You take it," she said. "Split it?" he offered. So they did, and shared toast that evening. At her garden table, under the lilac tree, it was the first time they sat close enough to hear the rhythm of each other's breath. The conversation was slow, like watercolor spreading across paper. He told her about his first classroom, the wobbly desks, the smell of chalk, the student who gave him a drawing of a frog. She told him about a gallery in Rome where the light came in sideways and the paintings almost glowed. They didn't try too hard. They just spoke. There was no need to impress, only to be fully there. And when the sky turned gold, he rose. She walked him to the gate, and for a moment, neither moved. Then he nodded. "Good night, Margot." "Good night, Daniel." The next night, he brought over honey cake, and she made mint tea. They watched fireflies for a long time, saying very little but sharing everything. And then they didn't go in. Not when the stars appeared, not when the wind picked up gently through the hedges. They stayed, still talking just enough to keep the night breathing. He told her about his mother's blueberry cobbler, how it always tasted like home, and how quiet his house felt after she passed. She told him about a painting she had once found behind another, an entire life hidden, colors waiting decades to be seen. They talked about books, old fears, new dreams, the feeling of losing time in a warm room. They didn't notice the hours passing. The mild jazz playing from the little radio inside kept the mood steady, soft, wordless. It was more than talking. They didn't want to lose even a millisecond. Each moment felt like a breath they didn't want to let go, until the sky turned pale and the birds began to stir. She looked at her watch. He looked at the horizon, and they both laughed. Somewhere, deep inside, they both wished the night would never end. That time might forget to move, and leave them in that gentle, glowing hour. Forever. We talked all night. We did. She made coffee. He toasted bread. They watched the sunrise together, wrapped in the kind of comfort that doesn't need explaining. And when it became too bright, they each went home, pulled the curtains, and slept. The whole day, without guilt, without plans. When they met again that evening at the same garden table, they smiled. The kind of smile only morning souls share. It felt like something new, a chapter turning without noise. And as the moon rose again, they didn't need tea or cake or words, just presence and breath, and the memory of a night that felt like an entire beginning. Every now and then, she would look over at him, and he would already be looking back. It felt like a rhythm, a new kind of music, no instruments, just breath and stillness and soft light. In the village, people began to smile when they passed. They were no longer strangers with lamps. They were Daniel and Margot, the lamplight pair. One evening, she asked if he liked old records. "Very much," he said. So she brought out a player, dusted and slow, and they listened to crackling jazz and old waltzes. Her feet tapped, his fingers curled around his cup. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, but it was everything. Sometimes, the life you imagined is quieter than you expected, and better. As the moon rose and the lamp glowed behind the window, she leaned back, sipped her tea, and said, "This is nice." He nodded. "It really is." And neither of them had ever meant anything more than they did right then. Summer arrived quietly, with long golden evenings and slow, humming afternoons. The village buzzed softly. Children chased butterflies through open fields, laundry flapped like lullabies on the line, and Margot's roses opened wider. As if listening, Daniel's windows were often open now, letting in music and the smell of lemon balm from the pots he'd begun tending. Their mornings continued, 2 cups of tea on separate porches, but their evenings were something else entirely now. They cooked together sometimes, pasta with herbs from her garden, soup with vegetables from his. They laughed over unevenly sliced carrots, shared stories over slow-boiling pots. One evening it rained, a soft, silver kind of rain. They stayed inside, listened to thunder, watched water paint the windows. She pulled out an old box of photos, and they sat on the floor, surrounded by sepia memories. Her younger self in a yellow dress, his father in a crisp navy uniform. They pointed, smiled, paused, and every silence felt full. Later that week, Daniel brought over a radio he'd fixed, the kind with big round dials. He turned it on and the room filled with a tune from decades past, a song she remembered from her mother's kitchen. Without thinking, she hummed along and he offered a hand. They danced, not perfectly, not with steps, but with warmth. His hand on her back, her cheek near his collar, the lamp on the windowsill, glowed softly behind them. And for a moment, time folded. They didn't speak of it the next day. They didn't need to. But the space between them had changed. It was no longer a space. It was something shared. One morning, he showed up with a book in his hand. "I thought we could read this aloud, 1 chapter a night." She said yes before even glancing at the title. So they began. Evenings in the garden, lanterns flickering, words floating between sips of tea. Sometimes they paused mid-sentence, to laugh, to wonder, to simply let the quiet settle. It became a rhythm, like their breath, like their steps. One night, the power went out. The village slipped into shadow, but their lamp stayed on. Faint, but glowing. He came over with a blanket. She had already made tea. They sat on the porch, wrapped in softness, watching the stillness around them. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he rested his hand over hers. No words, just the steady hum of belonging. The next morning, their neighbors waved as they passed. One of them said, "We saw your light. It made us feel safe." That evening, Margot found a note tucked in her windowsill. Not from Daniel, but from a child in the village, drawn in crayon. A picture of 2 houses with hearts and stars and lamps. And 3 words below, "Keep it on." She smiled, tucked it into a book, and turned the lamp on early that night. Daniel arrived moments later, carrying 2 slices of lemon cake. He didn't need to knock anymore. He just came home. The lamp stayed on, as the sky turned blue to ink, as their hearts folded deeper into the silence, and for the first time in many, many years, neither of them felt alone. Not even a little, because sometimes it's not about grand beginnings or perfect endings. It's about the light that never asks anything, just stays on. Autumn came like a lullaby, soft-footed, wrapped in warm air and golden leaves. The village slowed down, chimneys whispered, the bakery filled with cinnamon again, and the trees remembered how to let go. The lamp on Margot's windowsill kept glowing, every evening without fail, sometimes before the sun dipped, sometimes after the first star appeared. Daniel often arrived before the light, carrying something simple, an apple pie he'd baked, a poem he'd scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt. Once, just a leaf. It fell perfectly, he said. Margot began placing a second cup out by habit. Before he even arrived, and Daniel started reading the weather aloud, as if narrating their days together. They didn't name what it was, they didn't need to. It grew between them like ivy, slow, quiet, tender. There was something new in the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, and something steady in the way he held the door for her. Little things, but everything. One crisp morning, he brought over a tiny wooden box. Inside, a compass. "So you never feel lost," he said. She placed it on the shelf beside the lamp, and that evening, she gave him her grandmother's recipe book, with her own scribbles in the margins. They began marking days, not with calendars, but with rituals. Every Thursday, a new poem. Every Sunday, soup and stories. Fridays, walks beneath the changing leaves. Saturdays, records, slow dancing, and cinnamon tea. They raked leaves together, let them fall again just to hear the sound. They baked things that crumbled in their hands, laughed when the jam spilled. Once they carved a pumpkin, terribly lopsided, and placed it on the porch anyway. "It has personality," she said. The villagers noticed, but never asked. It was clear. Daniel and Margot were no longer apart. They had stitched a shared life, not with vows, but with time and tea and tenderness. One chilly evening, as they sat with blankets across their knees, Daniel looked at the lamp. "I think it means more than we thought," he said. She nodded. "It's not just light, it's a heartbeat." They fell into silence again. But this one was fuller, richer. The stars above them blinked, and somewhere in the village, another lamp clicked on. Winter curled its fingers through the trees. Frost kissed the rooftops, and the porch became a place for cocoa. Inside, Margot and Daniel played records, read beside the fire, and sometimes simply sat, wrapped in a silence that held them. They began writing letters together, to old friends, to the Margot and Daniel of years ago. She wrote, "We are slower now, but not quieter." He wrote, "I never knew belonging until the day I saw the light in her window." Then came the letter, an invitation to speak at the village winter gathering, about the lamp, and what it meant. Daniel hesitated. Margot encouraged, "Just tell them what we've lived," she said. So on a snow-silent night, with every window in the hall glowing, he stood beside her. He spoke of small things, the value of consistency, the joy of presence, how light can be love. And when he finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat, letting it settle, holding it like warmth in their palms. Afterward, Margot took his hand, not with surprise, but like something she'd done for years. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, slow. They walked home that night, through streets that shimmered with hush, and when they reached her gate, she didn't invite him in. He was already home. They kept the lamp on that night, even after they fell asleep on the couch. A book open between them, a blanket drawn over their legs, 2 teacups growing cold on the side table, and in the quiet, the kind that holds everything. They dreamed, not of new things, but of the life they already had. Simple, shared, steady, and as morning returned with its slow light, the lamp was still glowing, as if it too had fallen gently in love with the home it had found and the hearts it had kept warm. Thank you for listening. We hope the lamp left a little light glowing in you. If you could see the lamp's glow and feel the love it carried, tap the like button so that this warmth can reach others too, who may need it, just like you. And if it stayed with you, share it with your loved ones. Explore our collection anytime, full of stories made to soothe and gently slow the world around you. And if you haven't yet, subscribe for more soft journeys. Still to come, from all of us at Story Planet, good night, sweet dreams, and may tomorrow greet you with peace and quiet joy.